So our theme, as I'll remind ourselves, brand new for 2021, at least it's sort of new, timeless wisdom, evolutionary vision. And the theme for February is one journey, many paths. And for today, it's the infinite invisible. And the first kind of piece that sets off this theme is this quote from Joel Goldsmith. In going within, you do not turn to your own spirituality or your own goodness or your own strength or your own knowledge, but you go within to unleash the infinite invisible. And from Ernest Holmes, he says something similar to this. You must become the thing you want. You must see it, think it, realize it before the creative power of mind can work it out for you. The important little piece for me is being versus doing, right? So the doing part is the spiritual practice. It is you're taking that time and that effort and that energy, for example, to go within, to do as Angelica so beautifully led us through this morning in that kind of contemplative practice. Or you're taking the time to affirm, to treat, to declare some truth. You're engaging in that activity of prayer, of spiritual mind treatment, again, which practitioner Irma led us in so beautifully at the beginning of our time together. And that's the doing part. The being part is that stuff, that feeling, uh, that shift in energy and emotion in your atmosphere and your attitude uh, that is coming about as a result of the doing. In the being, then the goodness that is already true about you is able to shine through. It's always this dance, right? Doobie doobie doo, the Frank Sinatra uh, version of the metaphysical journey. And it is all for, this kind of affirmation. With trust, joy, and delight, I let God be God in me. With trust, joy, and delight, I let God be God in me. So it's an allowance, but it's a practice that leads to that openness, to that sort of let go and let God, that any particular spiritual journey leads to that point, that leads to that feeling, leads to that poise. Now, we'll acknowledge that today is Valentine's Day, and traditionally, Valentine's Day was born out of a focus on what we will call primary or spousal relationship, right? A kind of romantic love. But fortunately for us, it's evolved into a day in which we get to acknowledge any of those powerful or meaningful or loving relationships in our lives, whatever form or whatever function those relationships take. Valentine's Day is that time to acknowledge what those relationships are, what they mean, their value, how we esteem them, and how we are grateful for them. And the operative word here is that relationships, and I believe that relationships are important to this recognition of the infinite invisible. Now, certainly relationships have some earth plane humanville value or meaning, right? That there are some functions and features of relationship that are essential and existential in some way. Relationships at their heartfelt best are really a function of feeling. They are invisible, right? They're apart from those things I've already pointed out, the rest of the aspects of relationship are invisible because relationship, that whole category is feeling, right? And we're relating beings. We're always feeling about something, and therefore in relationship to it, in relationship and in relating to how one feels, and then how one feels in context to something or someone else. And in this respect, all of the creation of God is in a way relational. Because if I'm to accept the allness of God, I'm also to accept that the allness of God is on that journey to recognize, to realize, to express, to experience, to extend, to circulate more of God, more of good, whether it is a grain of sand or the chair I'm sitting in or the plants and the birds in my backyard or my fellow sojourners on the human plane. All of this is in a process, in a movement toward a greater realization of that infinite invisible. Some way, shape, or form, you and I are bringing more good, more God to life on our journey. And therefore, this is those moments. And again, that sounds like a lofty goal, right? That could be kind of overwhelming at certain points, depending on whether or not you're really in the flow of something good in your life or whether or not you have the appearance of challenge in your life. But moment by moment by moment, and that's this experience, is moment by moment by moment, just as being is an experience moment by moment by moment, that those moments, that recognition of living spirit, of you living spirit and spirit living you. Now, I often refer to A Course in Miracles, and that was an important teaching, or it still is an important teaching to me. And A Course in Miracles describes relationship as kind of the university and graduate school on your metaphysical journey. That relationships are the things that propel you the most, the furthest, the fastest on your spiritual journey once you begin to incorporate that concept into your practice, into your process. And so there are a few things that A Course in Miracles points out about relationships that I think are valuable here, and they're also very consistent with the way that Ernest Holmes in The Science of Mind talks about relationship. First of all, relationships are forever. And that's another way of saying that you and I are relational beings. We are constantly relating to someone or something in some way, whether it's to ourselves or to someone else or even to a group. We're constantly in relationship. So those relationships go on forever. Now, what A Course in Miracles says, and I think Science of Mind tends to agree with this, that those relationships are constantly evolving. They're constantly growing and changing in some way. So the relationship lasts forever. The form, however, of that relationship continues to change. And there might be some really powerful relationships from your recent past that were active, where you were involved with someone and you're no longer so involved with someone. And that just means that the way in which that relationship has sustained and supported your journey and the person with whom you've had a relationship has kind of run its course. And you and they have moved on to a new form of your relationship in order for you and the other person to have some other next lesson, some next step in their journey. And there are other cases where you're in the midst of a very powerful and transformative relationship. And again, that is where your focus is. That's what's got your attention. And of course, that is where your greatest opportunity to learn and grow comes. Now, as you learn the lessons of those relationships, that contributes to how that relationship evolves and transforms. And of course, lots of us have the intention for every relationship to have this increasing value or growth or importance in our lives. And that's a lofty, that's a noble intention. However, that may not be with that relationship that you desire, that I desire. The person with whom you're having that relationship or the people with whom you're having that relationship, those might come and go. Those might change. but the enduring intention of your relationship to realize more of the infinite invisible, that certainly manifests and demonstrates in your life. Now, the last thing about relationships that I wanted to point out right now is that relationships are a mirror to our expression, our experience, to where we are in consciousness. Sometimes that mirror is a little bit foggy. Sometimes that's a funhouse mirror. And sometimes that mirror is just very crystal clear. And therefore, the more that a person becomes aware, acknowledges the value of that relationship, whether or not that value is shared by the person or the object of that relationship doesn't matter. Once a person begins to really see the significance, the value in relationship, the clearer that mirror becomes. And therefore, the more easily able a person is to heal and grow. And it's kind of there's a bumper sticker version of what I just said, which says that relationships are for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. Right? We've all heard that. And that's kind of what Ernest Holmes and the Science of Mind are saying, and that's kind of what A Course in Miracles are saying. But it's all a revelation of that infinite invisible, that sort of indescribable goodness, godness that's already true about you, about me, about all of the manifest creation and beyond of living spirit. Now, someone might hear what I just said and interpret it as, I can use relationship, I can therefore use people to advance myself, and that somehow that's okay. And of course, that there's a line between an apt use of relationship and something that is what I would call abusive in relationship. So I think that it does kind of meet the definition, but I think most of us have understood, either by experience or observation, where relationships are healthy and beneficial and where sometimes not so much. I think the intention for healthy, valuable relationships begins to, I will say, discern where relationships are useful and healthy and positive and productive, and maybe where they're not so much. It's up to each person to set healthy boundaries around relationships in their lives. And that also comes from having a strong support system and a strong spiritual practice. Now, as I mentioned before, I think we are relational beings, but I think all of God's creation are relational beings. And the reason that I think relationships have such an importance in our spiritual journey, at least so I think, is because relationships are built on feelings. Now, we know that feelings, in the Science of Mind speak, are synonymous with qualities of God. If I feel love, I'm feeling love of God, or love with God. If I feel joy, I'm feeling joy of God or joy with God. If I feel peace, I'm feeling the peace of God or peace with God. And again, in Science of Mind terms, we kind of distinguish between feelings and emotions. And those feelings are those inward sensations, right? And you have a choice in most cases to express those inward sensations that often are expressed as emotions. So feelings are part of the infinite invisible, part of that God in you as you. And the emotions that flow from those feelings are the effect of those inward sensations, of that goodness, of that godness within you. And certainly each person gets to feel or discern this for themselves, but those positive, constructive feelings are those feelings of God, of good within you. Those feelings that are not so positive, not so constructive, those you might just attribute to an something getting your attention in order to be shifted, in order to be healed, in order for something greater or better to be revealed. They do have their functions and features, but it's wholly different, at least in my experience, when I am attuned to that positivity within me, those feelings that grow my life, that expand my life, that help me correct course. Those are the ones that I amplify, and the ones that are not contributing to that, those are the ones that get my attention in order to be transformed, in order to be moved in some way, or let go of in some way. Now, the best way, individually and collectively, I feel, to move those and discern those is through spiritual practices, right? Meditation, treatment, affirmation, prayer, some form of spiritual study or reading, some sort of journaling, perhaps visioning, asking yourself, what is God's highest idea for this moment? And what is the quality or the feeling of it? And then less than daily, probably, some people might be daily, being of sacred service, seeing your spiritual counselor or practitioner, giving as a spiritual practice. We'll have an opportunity for that in a moment. And doing what you're doing right now in participating in the beloved community. There are dimensions to this that come about in a communal practice. So I do want to share this couple of quotes, one from Pema Chodron. Buddha is your inherent nature. That means if you're going to grow up fully, you begin to connect with the intelligence that you already have, meaning that that's already in you, and you're connecting or relating to it in a new and different way. Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of my faves, when you have broken your God of tradition and ceased from your God of rhetoric, then may God fire the heart with its presence. I think the spiritual practices, individually and collectively, contribute to both of these. In other words, that spiritual practice reveals more of that intelligence, that goodness, that thinking and thought, that consideration, that conceptual part, as well as letting go of these other constructs, these other concepts, so that something greater, something more powerful, something more present can infuse your heart, can grow you at that feeling, at that relational level. Now, context is everything to me. I've mentioned this many times. And there is, as I mentioned, a dimension to spiritual practice that is only accessible through the communal, and some of it's only accessible through the personal. And we had a little bit of that experience earlier when we were working with our vision and mission. In the timeless wisdom part of our annual theme, our Western dominant culture was and is very influenced by what I will call a written co-optation of ancient Judeo-Christian oral traditions. How's that? In a way, taking an oral tradition and putting it in written form changes the context. So it's really common for a Western application of the Bible for us to read the Bible, right? And then interpret that passage in a personal way, meaning I've read this story or I've read this scripture, and what does it mean for me, or what does it mean to me? But the original context of the ancient Hebrews was communal first and foremost. There was rarely ever a reason or a value of a personal interpretation of this. And therefore, the question that the ancient Hebrews would ask themselves when presented with a challenge or a story or whatever it might be was, what does this mean for our family? What does this mean for our tribe? What does this mean for our community? And there was a role in the community called a pesher. And I will call a pesher a summarizer or an aggregator. And a pesher was often an elder in the community. And there wasn't just one, there would usually be many. And sometimes many of the elders or the pastors within the community would chime in on how something related to the community, what was valuable for the spiritual growth of that community. And therefore, they would begin each of their summarizations with the words, for this community or for this family or for this tribe, here's what this means. So I'll just give you a little quick example. So there's a passage from John. It says, I am the bread of life. Now, I'm just going to read this through and I'm going to go back real quick. And it says, I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, and yet they died. This is the bread which came down from heaven, that a person may eat of it and not die. So this is Yeshua speaking, and he's saying, I am the living bread because I came down from heaven. If any person eats of this bread, they shall live forever. And the bread which I will give is my body, which I am giving for the sake of the life of the world. Right? So already Yeshua was setting this context up, not for him personally or not for you personally, but setting this up for the value of the community. Now, the key word here is bread, because this is a very symbolic, metaphorical language in which the ancient Hebrews were speaking. We're talking about Aramaic at this point. And what everybody there would have known was that the bread to which Yeshua was referring is the teaching of the Judaic principles, the teaching of Judaica. So it says, I am the teaching of life. Your ancestors were teaching from some old material. They were teaching from some dead material. I'm bringing some new information here. I'm bringing some new teaching. And I am so committed to this teaching that I offer my entire being for this teaching to be shared and learned and loved throughout the community. So you see how the context of this shifts. Now, the Pesher would have said, for this community, the bread of which Yeshua is speaking is the God of our forefathers, the God of our ancestors. They were clinging to a dead script. They were clinging to some stuff that was rigid and inflexible, and it served at one purpose, but is no longer serving. And therefore, Yeshua is representing a transmission and a turnover of a new teaching to the ancient Hebrews. And therefore, the communal and the personal interpretation has become very different, because at this point, the community is now enrolled and engaged in joining together for something new, for something that is better serving that community. And that is certainly the opportunity that relationship and communal spiritual practice represents to us here right now today. Now, the other important concept about relationship is the word relate or relative. And in metaphysical principles, we talk about the relative versus the absolute, right? Well, the infinite invisible is that absolute nature, unchanging, all loving, all knowing, all compassionate aspect of God that's already so about you, that's already within you. It's already within me. It's already within everyone. It's the qualities of that infinite invisible that are called forth, that are elevated through relationship, meaning that relationship is invoking, is putting into a sensory system that we know as feeling that good of God within. So even if we break down the qualities of a healthy relationship, a quality of mutuality, a quality of interdependence, a quality of safety in order for people to grow, right? A quality of honesty, personal honesty and shared honesty, a quality of equality, a quality of independence, and a quality of support. Notice all those things are felt within. There are no necessarily two exact ways in which each of us experiences or expresses those qualities. But I think as I mentioned them, you can all resonate with some form or fashion of those qualities as you're sitting there right now, and as that comes as drawn forth in relationship. So are you connecting with this? Meaning, is this some amorphous thing that you still haven't related relationships to the goodness, the God qualities that are already so about you? Is this relationship you're having healthy? Is it teaching you something about the good, the godness that's within you? And most importantly, is this relationship you're having helping your heart sing? Sing out loud. And I trust it is. So I love this quote from Helen Keller. It says, "The best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even heard, but must be felt with the heart." And again, I'll remind you about our affirmation: with trust, joy, and delight, I let God be God in me. And finally, there's a core concept, and it's the 10th core concept out of 10, which is kind of curious, right? It says, you believe in the direct revelation of truth through your intuitive and spiritual nature, and that anyone may become a revealer of truth who lives in close contact with the indwelling God. So we're talking about this relationship that you have with this indwelling God, with this infinite invisible within you. And finally, and I invite you now just to listen to this as I read it, because I think it's so wonderful and powerful. God loves you already and has from your very beginning. The spiritual journey is about seeing what is already true, that God loves you already, and then beginning to live in this relationship. It is about becoming conscious of and intentional about a deepening relationship with God. And this from Marcus Borg. So with that, I just invite you to turn your attention inward and just notice even just the idea of an indwelling God, of an infinite invisible. And that infinite invisible may surround you. You might feel it within. You might localize it to some aspect or area of your being, of your body temple. But know that this is living spirit, and this is the truth of who you are. It does indwell you, it does surround you, it does enliven you, it does connect you, it does circulate this good. Within you, it is that deep and abiding knowing, feeling, loving, and compassion. So I speak my word in this moment that each of us here today both joins together in healthy, uplifting, fulfilling, transformational relationships. That each of us acknowledges that love shared, that God circulated, and gives great thanks for this opportunity to grow in this way that is so specially and wonderfully human. This phase of your spiritual journey, of your soul's journey, is certainly blessed with magnificent relationship that reveal that infinite invisible, both for you and for those in whom you join. That is the truth of your being, that you let God be God as you, in you, and surrounding you. And so, blessing the world as we are blessed, I give thanks for this answered prayer, for this communion in spirit. And I simply allow it to be. I release it into the law of mind and action, for it is now happening. The truth of your being shines forth right now. It's happening right now. And together we say, and so it is. Amen. Thank you all so much.
Amen.